Join the story family. Subscribe and stay with us.
My name is Michael, and this happened a few years ago on New Year's Eve. I live in a small private house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people generally know each other. It's usually peaceful there, especially in winter, when most people don't go out unless they have a reason. That year, I was home alone. My wife had gone to stay with her parents earlier that day, and I was planning to join her the next morning. The evening was cold, but not unbearable. Light snow was falling slowly, covering the yard with a thin white layer. My house was decorated with holiday lights, just like many of the houses on our street. I had dinner, turned on the TV for background noise, and sat in the living room, half watching something without really paying attention. Around 9 in the evening, I heard a sound that didn't immediately register as something serious. It sounded like footsteps in the snow, slow, deliberate footsteps. At first, I assumed someone was just walking past my house, but the sound didn't fade away. Instead, it got closer. I muted the TV and listened. The footsteps stopped. Everything went quiet. I walked over to the living room window and carefully pulled the curtain aside. Near the edge of my front yard, close to the path leading up to my porch, stood a man. He was just standing there, facing my house. I couldn't clearly see his face because of the darkness and the light reflecting from the windows, but I noticed he wasn't wearing a hat, even though it was cold outside. His arms hung at his sides. He wasn't moving. I stood there for a few seconds trying to understand what he was doing. Maybe he had the wrong address. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But something about the situation felt off. I opened the front door just a few inches and asked if I could help him. The man didn't respond right away. He slowly lifted his head and looked directly at me. Even from that distance, I could tell his gaze was too focused, too intent. He said he was looking for someone he knew and thought he might be lost. His voice was calm, but strangely flat, almost emotionless. I told him he had the wrong address and suggested he check the house numbers. He nodded, but he didn't leave. I closed the door and locked it. Through the window, I could see that he was still standing there. Minutes passed. He didn't move. Then he took a step forward, onto the path that led straight to my porch. I felt a heavy sense of unease settle in my chest. I went back to the door and told him that this was private property and that he needed to leave. This time, he didn't say anything at all. He just stared at the door. I stepped deeper into the hallway and grabbed my phone. I hadn't called the police yet, but I was close. That's when I heard slow footsteps on the wooden porch steps. One step, then another. I stood in the hallway, phone in my hand, listening as the footsteps stopped right in front of my front door. No knocking, no doorbell, just silence. After a few seconds, I heard the footsteps moving away. I carefully looked out the window again. The man was walking back down the path toward the street. He didn't look back. I didn't sleep much that night. I checked the doors and windows several times and left the hallway light on until morning. I never saw him again. The next day, I drove to my wife's parents' house and told her everything. We decided it was probably just a strange but random encounter. Still, every New Year's Eve, when the night is quiet and snow falls softly, I catch myself listening closely, half expecting to hear footsteps outside my house again.
My name is Ethan, and this happened a few years ago on New Year's Eve. At the time, I was working as a delivery driver for a large grocery chain. Night shifts paid better, especially during the holidays, so I often volunteered for them. Most people were home with their families or getting ready to celebrate, which meant the orders kept coming. I lived in a suburban area where houses were spaced out, not packed tightly together. Mostly single-family homes, some newer, some older, with long driveways and open yards. That year, snow had come early, and by the evening of December 31st, the roads were covered in a thin layer of ice. My route that night was pretty normal, just a few deliveries in nearby neighborhoods. Around 9:30 p.m., I received an order in an area I'd only been to once or twice before. The address looked ordinary, but the map showed the house sitting slightly apart from the others. When I pulled up, the first thing I noticed was that there were no lights on inside the house. No holiday decorations, no Christmas lights, nothing. Nearby homes at least had something lit, but this one was completely dark. I figured maybe the people didn't celebrate or had stepped out, but why place an order? I grabbed the bags and walked up to the front door. I rang the doorbell. No answer. After waiting a moment, I rang it again. While standing there, I noticed fresh footprints in the snow, but they didn't lead straight to the front door. They veered off to the side of the house and stopped. About a minute, the door opened. A man in his early 40s stood there. He wore a dark jacket and showed no sign of holiday cheer. He just looked at me silently. I confirmed his name and handed him the groceries. He took the bags without saying anything. As I turned to leave, he suddenly asked, "How late are you working tonight?" It was a strange question, but I brushed it off and told him I had a few more hours. He nodded and closed the door. As I walked back to my car, I instinctively glanced over my shoulder. The house stayed dark. The next delivery was only about 5 minutes away. I finished it quickly and moved on. About 20 minutes later, my app notified me of another order from the same address. I assumed it was a glitch, but the name and address were identical. When I pulled up again, something felt off immediately. There were more footprints in the snow now, clearly leading from the house toward the road. The house was still completely dark. I stayed in my car longer than I should have. I checked my mirrors and scanned the area. Nothing. I tried calling the customer through the app, but the call disconnected instantly. Reluctantly, I grabbed the bags and walked up to the door. This time, it opened almost immediately. The same man stood there, closer than before. He took the groceries again, but this time he didn't close the door. "Do you always work alone?" he asked. I said yes. I didn't know why, but a deep sense of unease settled. It wasn't panic, just a strong feeling that something wasn't right. I said goodbye quickly and walked back to my car. I got in and started the engine, and then someone knocked on the passenger side window. I turned my head sharply. It was him. He stood far too close to the car, staring straight at me. No anger, no aggression, just watching. "Happy New Year," he said quietly. I nodded without rolling the window down and drove off immediately. I didn't speed, but my heart was racing like I was running. A few blocks away, I pulled over to calm myself. I checked the time. It was almost 11 p.m. I turned off the app and decided to end my shift early. Later that night, as the new year approached, I noticed a missed call from the same number, time-stamped after I had already left the area. I never accepted deliveries in that neighborhood again. And now, every New Year's Eve, when I step outside late at night and see quiet streets and dark houses, I think about that unlit home and the feeling that someone was watching, deciding whether or not to take one more step.
My name's Caleb, and this happened a few years ago on New Year's Eve. At the time, I was living alone in a small rental house just outside a mid-sized town in Pennsylvania. It was one of those quiet neighborhoods where nothing ever really happened, Mostly families, older couples, and a few people like me who kept to themselves. That year I wasn't planning on celebrating. Most of my friends were out of town and I didn't feel like going anywhere crowded. I figured I'd stay home, order food, and wait for midnight to pass like any other night. By around 8 p.m., the neighborhood had gone unusually quiet. A few houses had lights on and decorations outside, but many were dark. Snow had started falling earlier in the evening, not heavy, just enough to coat the lawns and sidewalks. The kind of night where sound doesn't travel far. Around 8:40, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so at first I thought maybe someone had the wrong house. I looked through the front window, but I didn't see anyone standing on the porch. I opened the door slightly and looked outside. The porch was empty. I shrugged it off and closed the door. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time, I checked the window immediately. Still no one there. I stepped outside, thinking maybe it was a neighbor messing around or a kid running off. The porch light illuminated fresh snow, but there were no footprints anywhere near the door. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I went back inside and locked the door. I told myself it was probably nothing. Old doorbells malfunction. Maybe moisture got inside the wiring. At 9:05, the doorbell rang again. Same result. No one there. I checked the side of the house, the driveway, even the sidewalk leading up to it. Still no footprints. The snow was untouched. I started paying closer attention to the house itself. Every light was on inside now. The TV was muted. I didn't like how quiet it felt. At 9:30, the doorbell rang again, but this time it was different. It wasn't a single press. It was 2 short rings, followed by a pause, and then 1 long press. That pattern stuck with me because it felt deliberate. I didn't answer the door. Instead, I stood a few feet back and watched the window. I waited. Nothing happened. A few minutes passed and then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my doorbell app. Motion detected. I opened a camera feed. At first I didn't see anything. Then the image adjusted slightly, and I saw a person standing just off to the side of the porch, out of direct view of the door. They were close enough to trigger the motion sensor, but positioned so the camera only caught part of their shoulder. They weren't ringing the bell. They were waiting. I watched for almost a full minute. They didn't move. Eventually, the motion alert timed out, and the feed went still again. I locked every door in the house. About 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time, once, quick and sharp. I checked the camera immediately. The person was gone. Instead, I noticed something else. Footprints had appeared in the snow, leading from the sidewalk up toward the porch, but they stopped short, about 2 feet away from the door. Whoever it was hadn't stepped fully onto the porch. I stayed inside for the rest of the night. I didn't answer the door again, no matter what. The doorbell rang 2 more times before midnight, always in short, uneven patterns. At 12 a.m., fireworks went off in the distance. The noise felt like a relief. I didn't hear the doorbell again after that. The next morning, I checked outside in daylight. The footprints were still there. They came from the sidewalk, stopped near the porch, and then turned around and went back the same way. No other marks, no signs of running, just slow, deliberate steps. I asked my neighbors later if anyone had been out ringing doorbells that night. No one had. A few of them weren't even home. I lived in that house for another year. The doorbell never rang like that again.
My name is Richard, and this happened a few years ago on New Year's Eve. I was living alone in a small single-family house in the suburbs. It was a normal neighborhood. Quiet streets, a few street lights, neighbors you don't see often but recognize. Nothing that ever felt unsafe. That night, I didn't have any plans. I stayed home. New Year's programs were playing on TV, and every now and then I could hear fireworks coming from nearby neighborhoods. I had dinner, cleaned up the kitchen, and planned to go to bed early. Around 11 p.m., I stepped outside to take out the trash. The air was cold but dry. There were patches of snow on the ground, but the driveway was mostly clear. As I was walking back toward the house, I noticed something that immediately felt off. My garage door was open. I stopped in the middle of the yard. I knew for a fact that I had closed it. I always did, especially at night. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to remember if I had opened it earlier. I hadn't. I hadn't used the car all day that day. I walked closer. The garage was dark. I didn't hear any movement, no footsteps, nothing, just the open door. I stepped inside and turned on the light. Everything looked normal. My car was there. The tools were where I left them. I scanned the shelves and the floor, but nothing seemed disturbed. There were no signs of forced entry. I told myself it was probably a glitch with the automatic opener. I pressed the button, and the door closed. I even waited a few seconds to make sure it stayed shut. Then I went back inside. About 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the living room when I heard the familiar sound, the soft electronic beep the garage system makes when the door starts moving. I stood up immediately. I went to the window and looked outside. The garage door was open again. This time, I didn't feel confused. I felt tense. Not panic, just a sharp sense of alertness. I stood there watching the darkness, trying to see if anything moved. The street was quiet. The fireworks had stopped. The street light was steady. I grabbed my phone and a flashlight and stepped outside slowly. The light inside the garage was off. I shined the flashlight inside and noticed that the side door leading from the garage into the yard was unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. I always did. I didn't go inside again. I stood there for a moment listening. Complete silence. No movement at all. Then I went back into the house, locked every door, double-checked the locks, and turned on lights in a few rooms. Then I called a neighbor who lived nearby. He was home and agreed to come over. When he arrived, we checked the yard, the garage, and the doors together. Nothing was damaged, nothing was missing, no footprints, no signs of a break-in. Just the fact that someone had opened the garage and unlocked the door while I was home. My neighbor suggested it could have been someone checking houses during the holidays, seeing if anyone was inside, then leaving without taking anything. Nothing else happened that night. I left the lights on and didn't go back outside until morning. I never found out who it was or why they were there. And honestly, that's the part that still bothers me.
My name is Ryan, and this happened a few years ago on the evening of New Year's Eve. At the time, I lived in a quiet suburb and worked at a shopping center nearby. I wasn't scheduled to work on New Year's night itself, but I did have a late shift, so I was heading home by bus. My neighborhood was especially quiet around the holidays. A lot of people traveled to visit family or stayed inside, and the buses ran less frequently than usual. I knew that, so I left work a little early to avoid waiting outside in the cold for too long. The bus stop was near a small intersection. A single streetlight cast a yellow glow over the sidewalk. There was a closed convenience store nearby and an empty parking lot beside it. When I arrived, there was already one man standing there. He was wearing a dark jacket with no hat, facing away from the road and looking toward a row of dark houses. At first, I didn't think much of it. People look all kinds of ways this time of year. I stood a short distance away, pulled out my phone, and checked the bus schedule. The next bus was about 10 minutes away. After a few minutes, I noticed the man slowly turn his head and look at me. Not aggressively, not intensely, just watching. I glanced up, made brief eye contact, and went back to my phone. The silence felt strange. There were no cars passing, no other people around. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear occasional fireworks going off. Then he spoke. He asked how long I had been standing there. It was a normal question, but the tone felt off, like he wasn't asking out of curiosity, but to confirm something. I told him about 5 minutes. He nodded and went quiet again. A few more minutes passed. I felt his eyes on me again. This time he asked if buses usually ran late at night. I said they did, but not very often on holidays. He smiled slightly and said, "Guess we'll be waiting a while then." Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. It wasn't threatening, just unsettling, like he was thinking out loud. I stepped a little closer to the edge of the bus stop, nearer to the road. A moment later, he shifted too, mirroring my movement. Not abruptly, just enough for me to notice. That's when I realized he wasn't just standing there. He was adjusting to me. I looked down the road, hoping to see headlights. Nothing. He spoke again and asked where I was heading. I lied and named a different part of town. He said he was going pretty much the same way. By then, he had moved closer. There was less than a few feet between us. I didn't feel outright panic, but a tight sense of unease, the kind where you know the situation could turn bad very quickly. I said I might just walk home instead. He responded immediately, "That's a long walk, especially tonight." The way he said it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like an observation. I didn't wait anymore. I turned and started walking down the road toward a brighter intersection. I didn't run, but I didn't take my time either. I didn't look back. I heard him take a few steps behind me, and then stop. I reached the next bus stop where the lights were brighter and a car was parked nearby with its headlights on. I waited there, and about 5 minutes later, the bus arrived. As I got on, I glanced back through the window. The original bus stop was empty. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. Maybe nothing. Maybe he was just someone acting strangely on a strange night. But ever since then, I don't wait alone at empty bus stops at night, especially on New Year's Eve.